everyone. Welcome to the latest installment of LP In Depth. Today we have Alex, who is virtually attending the Sundance Film Festival. This is
from snowy Utah.
Yeah, he's got his beanie on. What's the beanie say on it?
Flavor and film. It was a DoorDash promo through Sundance where you got a box. It had the beanie, it had some snacks, it had a like film notebook, and it had a candle themed to whatever genre box you got. Mine ended up being shorts, which is sugar cookie for some reason. But I've been burning that today while watching a lot of movies.
So this is your second Sundance. You went for real last year as sort of a trial to kind of see, oh, you're wearing the jacket. Yes. This year, obviously, it's quasi-virtual, so we're not in Park City, Utah, or any part of Utah.
I would also say that last year when I was actually in Utah, I was barely in Park City, but because the festival is so spread out. But yeah, I've actually been really enjoying the virtual format that they've been doing. It's allowed me to see a lot more films because when you're actually at Sundance Film Festival, you're usually changing theaters to try and get to the movies that you actually want to see. Unless you just want to see everything and can park in one place, then you could hypothetically see about 4 movies a day. But in reality, actually being there, 2 was my average, and that took up the whole day. You know, you had to get there early. You had a guaranteed ticket, so you had a seat. But if you weren't there in time, they gave it up to a standby queue, and you didn't necessarily have a good seat. So you wanted to get there really early because people started lining up, in some cases, 2 hours before the next movie started. So, that's been nice. Also, getting to eat food has been nice because that's a chronic problem at Sundance Film Festival, is the lack of available quality food while you're like trying to get something quick. The lines for the food get crazy too. And I was there for a lot of it by myself, so I didn't have somebody to like hold a place in line, and I went and bought food for us. So that was fun.
So just to give it, we're a Disney site, but Alex last year went because there was a whole lot of Disney content coming out of Sundance. Some we didn't know was going to be Disney. They purchased it. And some we did. Timmy Failure, Mistakes Were Made, some stuff from ESPN. So the way Sundance works is, people make movies. They could already have a distributor lined up. It could be, like Downhill was from Fox Searchlight, or they could make a movie and then try and sell it to someone like a Fox Searchlight or Hulu or what have you, which was done with Palm Springs last year. So going into Sundance, we don't know what necessarily is going to end up being on a Disney platform. So Alex just reviews, things that we think would be interesting or things that, kind of lend itself, even though they might end up on a different platform. So
yeah, what my goal was this year was to try and predict the future. Mm-hmm. And out of the list of films that are being screened at Sundance, I prioritized things that I thought could be acquired by Disney. Obviously, there's things that there's just no chance that they would be interested in for any of their platforms, particularly things that are in a foreign language. Although, actually, I'm really glad the first film that I saw of this festival was a foreign language film, and Neon/Hulu got it. So that was a surprise.
Yeah, so Neon has basically, they're going to release it theatrically, but then they kind of have a deal with Hulu. So when it comes to streaming, it'll be on Hulu, presuming that deal continues, which we are not aware that it won't. So we're just going to run through some of the films that Alex has seen. There's only one real sort of Disney thing produced, which isn't even really part of the festival. It's sort of a part of the expo, but we'll go through them. Some we know are, have already been purchased by things like Apple, but some may end up on a Disney platform. Most probably won't, but we'll just enjoy what Alex has to say. Now, I've seen some of these, but I haven't seen most. So we'll start. So should we leave the actual Disney thing for the end?
Up to you, whatever you want.
So why don't we start with your opening night film, which was Flea.
So Flea is the one that was acquired by Neon, and it's an animated documentary, which I was really interested in. Kind of a novelty, but it's not exactly something new. Winsor McKay, who created Gertie the Dinosaur, is credited with starting the animated documentary genre before Walt Disney even got into the animated business. But Flea, Flee, tells the story of a man who escaped out of Afghanistan in the 80s when things were really getting very tumultuous there. And the reason it's animated is he was very reluctant to show his face or give out his real name, not because he's done anything wrong, but he just wanted to keep his degree of anonymity. He didn't want to forever be known by this story, and it's something that he hadn't actually told in full to anybody before this documentary, even people closest to him outside of his family. It was a fascinating look at what it's like to actually be a refugee, to actually be smuggled out of a country. And their route of travel was from Afghanistan to Russia, and then trying to get from Russia to Sweden, where they had another member of the family who had become a resident of Sweden. But the loophole, because they weren't even Russian citizens, basically they were in Russia illegally. So they couldn't get illegally from Russia illegally to Sweden easily. And just the dynamic of that. And he ends up kind of living a life apart from his family in the end. And also another complicated layer is he's gay. And, after separating from his family as a young teenager and discovering that and, living his true life, he also fears, will his family even accept him? So there's so many layers to it. It was really well done, really good film. And I was really excited that Neon scooped it up pretty quickly, because I think with Hulu, it's going to reach a much wider audience. And I think there's a lot of cross appeal within the Disney fan community, just because the novelty of seeing an animated documentary is pretty cool.
That is cool. So, what did you end up giving it?
I think I gave it 4 out of 5 stars, but that's one because you got to be fast with Sundance. Like, the embargo usually lifts like right as the movie's release, right as the movie lets out, and you got to get to the next screening. So you kind of got to process your thoughts quickly. In retrospect, if I could change it, I would probably increase it to 5 out of 5, because having sat on that film for a couple of nights now, I like it. The more I think about it, the more I love it.
Great. I have not seen it, but I will take your word for it. Next, you have a short called Ghost Dogs. And I believe the headline is Ghost Dogs is disturbing beyond all reason.
That it is. So looking at the animated shorts category, I didn't expect that anything from that category would be purchased by Disney, but what I was really curious to see was what the major competition could be for awards season. And Ghost Dogs was the lone animated genre short entry from an American producer, which is why I singled it out as the one short that I was going to have time to check out from that category. It's very disturbing. So concept wise didn't sound so crazy. It's about a dog who is haunted by the ghosts of the family's other pets from years previously. And it immediately appealed to me because it uses a Klasky Supo animation style. If you were a Nicktoons kid in the 90s, they did Rugrats, Ariel Monsters, Rocko's Modern Life. Like, that's the style of animation. They also did the first couple seasons of The Simpsons, but they didn't really evolve into that Nicktoons style until the 90s. So it's done in that style, but it was very dark. It was creepy, but not like jump out at you scary. But what was really dark about it is not just that these dogs are kind of haunting this other dog, but they're like luring it into the basement, and you don't see the family, but you see their family photos, and they look normal enough at first. Oh God, please don't show that. Yeah, the ghost dogs have human hands and legs. And at one point they turn on the TV and watch like a dog food commercial and start pleasuring themselves, which was very hard to watch. But anyway, in the basement of this house, as the dogs are leading this dog through it, you start seeing that this family is in like a crazy cult, and they ritually kill the dogs and then use their bones to make like this super crazy like dog god shrine. It was so dark, so twisted, so demented. I wish I hadn't seen it. And that's Ghost Dogs. And Burrow and Out have no competition from this American-made short at the Academy Awards.
Okay, well, that was something.
Right.
Next, you got Rita Moreno
Just a
Just
girl who
who
decided to go for it. Yeah, it's a documentary about her life. I obviously knew her from West Side Story and a couple of other films. I didn't realize she's in Singing in the Rain. Um, and that documentary, not only is it in her own words, and she's about to turn 90. She'll be turning 90 the day after the Steven Spielberg West Side Story remake comes out, which she's in. But it kind of gives you her whole life story, all the ups and downs of her personal life and her career. And they use paper dolls, kind of animated paper dolls, as really nice segues. That all stems from as a little girl, her mother used to kind of dress her up all the time. So the first role she considers herself having played is her mother's own personal dressing doll. The title comes from that shirt, which she tells you towards the end of the film she just saw in a store window while like heading to an event where she was supposed to wear a ball gown, but it spoke to her and just really defined her life and who she was. But a lot of the film was actually spent talking about the racist stereotypes of Latino people in film. And when she arrived in Hollywood in that era, she was usually given roles of playing like a native island girl. Usually they darkened her skin tone and she had to speak in, different accents. So she was just always playing whatever like exotic version of a woman they needed in a movie. And she wasn't particularly treated well in Hollywood. She talks a lot about her own depression. And she opens up in the documentary about her own sexual abuse in the Hollywood system. In the wake of the Me Too movement, she kind of became a big part of that and became very outspoken against what happened to her in that time when it was more common than it is now. Which was really eye-opening. But it was an amazing documentary. It did have a couple of scenes towards the end of her with Steven Spielberg making the new West Side Story, which is a 20th Century Studios picture. And I actually hope that Hulu acquires this, Hulu or FX on Hulu or whatever, because I think it's perfect branding to tie into that new film. They would be so smart to use this as a vehicle to help promote that new feature, the new West Side Story.
So what do you end up giving this one?
I think I did 5 out of 5 for Rita Moreno.
Great. And next we got what's billed as a comedy, How It Ends.
Which it is a comedy.
Well, I'm not saying it's not. I'm just
No, it's not just billed as a comedy. It is a comedy. It is actually funny. I didn't love the actual story, but this was a film that was made completely during the pandemic, which is kind of impressive. And it's not about the pandemic, but it is about the end of the world. Basically, the premise is a meteor is coming, and at 2 a.m. LA time, we'll all just be kablooey. And what you're seeing in the picture there is the main character Liza and her younger teenage self, who she lives with. Kind of a metaphysical representation of herself. It's a little high concept, and they don't tell you that right up front. But as she's on her way to get some supplies for this end of the world party that she's been invited to, someone sees her younger self, and she says, "Wait, you can see this person?" And they actually meet another younger self while they're going about their day. But basically, she uses her last day alive to talk to her parents, an ex-friend, and an ex-boyfriend, and just kind of like squash some beef that she has so she can, go away peacefully. And then at the end of the night, she is going to go to this big party, and her car gets stolen, which complicates all of that. So she ends up going out on foot. They use the empty streets of Hollywood as their backdrop for this story, where everybody is just, in their home wallowing that their life's about to end because of this meteor. I didn't love it. It was funny. It had some very funny moments. It has like half the cast from It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia. A lot of other random celebrities and comedians. Wendy Cummings is in it. But in terms of like actually enjoying the film, I think I gave it 3 out of stars. It was okay, but I wouldn't recommend anybody really go out of their way for it. And as far as I know, it hasn't been picked up by any distributors. I wouldn't expect it to go for a lot of money.
Yeah. We'll talk about the one that seemed to have the initial sort of oomph behind it and when we get to it. But next is one I did see, Playing with Sharks.
Yeah, and this one I initially went into thinking maybe National Geographic would be the home for it, but after seeing it, I actually think Peacock would be so smart to nab this one. Playing with Sharks, it's about Valerie Taylor, who is a shark activist. She's done probably the most amount of work for ocean protection because of her the first ever ocean national park was set up where in that region it's illegal to take anything out of the water, and it is protected and it's created jobs. So there's 3 of those. But early in her life, she was a spearfisher. That's how she met her husband. And that led to some spearfishing of sharks for sport. But she and her husband both had a change of heart, decided to shift their focus instead to photographing and taking video of them. And they started doing that for nature documentaries and things like that. They've actually captured some of the first footage of great white sharks swimming freely in the ocean that was ever captured, which was cool. And Steven Spielberg came calling when it came time to make his movie Jaws. And so both Dory, sorry about the dogs. Not sure what's going on. Both Valerie Taylor and her husband Ron captured real life footage of great white sharks, which were used in Jaws. They show a lot of behind the scenes footage from that. Hi, I hear you. A lot of behind the scenes footage from that in the film, and it was pretty cool. So I would think Universal would want that perhaps for Peacock as a nice way to kind of round out your Jaws 1 through 4 experience.
This time it's personal.
Yeah. But no, it was an amazing film. What I really loved about it was, she's in her late 70s now, and they do show some like following her on another dive. And they juxtapose footage of her when she's in her 20s, getting into her hot pink wetsuit, with her now, almost 80, trying to get into it. And they show her doing it alone in her 20s, and then having a team of 3 men helping her into it now that she's, getting up there. And that was beautiful. Just seeing that difference of aging changes your physical body, but it really doesn't change your spirit or your desire to do things. And that was very poignant.
Yeah, I enjoyed it. It was she's not a conservationist I was familiar with. That's on me, not her. But it was interesting to see her story, her evolution, and sort of a complicated relationship with Jaws. She doesn't hate the movie by any stretch, even to this day, but she does have sort of is disappointed in humanity with the way they took the movie and suddenly took that as a way to go against sharks, even though it's obviously a fictional movie.
Yeah, so, it really makes it clear that fear of sharks because of Jaws led to hunting sharks just to try and rid them from the oceans, and how many sharks died as a result. They go into the fact that sharks as a large fish don't actually breed that often. So when you're losing sharks at that rate, it really dwindles down the species, and the effects that's had globally, even on like the health of our coral reefs. Like they attribute the loss of sharks in the ocean to why so many coral reefs have failed, which produce so much oxygen for the planet. It also gets into the illegal hunting practices of shark fin soup for places in China where that's a delicacy, and trying to get that practice to stop as well.
Next, we've got Street Gang.
How we got Sesame Street.
Yeah, this one was destined for HBO Max. But
and I didn't realize it was made by HBO Documentaries to begin with, so it was like, duh, that's going to HBO Max. But obviously, there's so much Jim Henson Muppet crossover with Disney, with Lucasfilm. So this was a neat one to see. It as a small part of the film goes into Jim Henson's kind of background, leading to him becoming involved in the show. But it was eye-opening for me because I always thought of Jim Henson as like the creator of Sesame Street. I just assumed this was his brainchild, and that's not it at all. It really introduces you to the other key players who made Sesame Street what it was. Also, another thing I just, was blissfully unaware of. Obviously, as a kid, I knew Sesame Street was multicultural, but I didn't know that the whole purpose of Sesame Street was to try and fix a huge discrepancy in the amount of knowledge that Black inner city kids had when they started kindergarten compared to their white peers. And so they were really trying to fix that gap, giving them the skills to know their alphabets, know their numbers, because starting kindergarten behind led to them being almost a full grade behind by the time they hit first grade, and it just snowballed from there. And so really the appeal of the show was set in an urban street where the action was for those kids, their own playground, an area that they were familiar with, incorporating in puppets and things that they were used to seeing on TV and would be attracted to. And then how they would incorporate entertainment in with those educational moments. It's really fascinating. They didn't talk at all about Walt Disney's approach to edutainment, which I was kind of wondering if they were going to label that, because they were trying to entertain and educate. And that is something that Disney had done in the 50s. And a lot of that content made for Disneyland, the TV show, and the Wonderful World of Disney, things like Donald in Math Magic Land, ended up becoming shown in schools for decades. I definitely saw Donald in Math Magic Land in the 90s at school. So,
it's what's interesting is, I grew up with the children's television workshop shows. There was this Electric Company, 321 Contact, Square One Television, and there was always something special about Sesame Street. It was better than any of the other shows that CTW tried to do afterwards. And this documentary, I really think, captures why it was lightning in a bottle, why, everyone here was able to make something truly special. I mean, it's still on the air, 50 years later, 52 seasons, I think is what they're up to. And, much like anyone who's interested in the Disney creative process about what makes, any Disney product special, why so many people try and make animated features, but why is it that certain Disney films, and most Disney films or Pixar films or what have you, are able to transcend? And this it really gives you an insight into the team, what each person brought to that team, and why it kind of was able to take off so rapidly. I mean, it became a cultural institution practically overnight. And, as someone who kind of got in there, at around season 15, 20, wherever, it's interesting to see how it was, the personalities and what they were trying to accomplish and why they were successful and why they weren't always successful. It's a really inspiring tale of what can happen when people want to fix a problem and do it from a place of joy.
I would also say one of the things that surprised me about it is when it gets rated, inevitably, it'll be a PG-13 or a TV-14, because they show a lot of behind-the-scenes footage of these grown men having bloopers, and there are some choice words every once in a while, and you'll see like the puppeteer behind Count like put the puppet down and light up a cigarette on the set. So things that like aren't necessarily kid friendly in Street Gang. But this was amazing, and I also feel like it pairs well with "Won't You Be My Neighbor," the Mr. Rogers documentary film that came out a couple of years ago. Just as I feel like if you watch Sesame Street, Mr. Rogers probably came on before or after, and you probably at least caught some of both. So I feel like those would go well together as like a double feature.
And if you're of my age and you remember when Mr. Hooper died, it hits you all over again.
It was not my era of Sesame Street, but I still found it very sad in the documentary.
So next we've got Faya Dayi.
Faya Dayi, which I'm trying to remember what that means. It's film poem in Umo, like one of the Ethiopian languages, of which there are several. So this is a documentary film, and it's beautifully shot. It's filmed in black and white, has some breathtaking cinematography moments that you could frame and just make art. But in terms of an actual narrative, this documentary doesn't use any kind of a narrator. They don't do one-on-one interviews. It's all subtitled in 2 different languages. And it's about a community in Ethiopia that pretty much is fully supported by the growing and selling of this hallucinogenic drug called khat, Khat. And it primarily follows 2 boys, one who seems to be around, maybe around age 15, and one who's early 20s. So that's the younger of the 2 boys that are kind of the stars of the documentary. And the one who's in his early 20s is contemplating trying to get out of Ethiopia by way of Egypt. He wants to go to Egypt and then into Europe, which is, I guess, like the easiest path. But and this little boy is saying, "Take me with you." But it's a really interesting documentary. It's not like Flea in that their lives don't seem to be in danger necessarily by like a corrupt government, although there are gangs and reasons to not necessarily feel safe in Ethiopia, but none of that comes into play in the story. The other thing that I didn't love about it is they really don't give you any context. So if you aren't familiar with Ethiopian culture, which I'm just going to put it out there, I'm not, they don't really give you a frame of reference, which I found kind of hard. Flea had that back and forth dialogue between a questioner and the main character, so that they could kind of elaborate on things that might not be of cultural significance to the viewer. And this kind of just assumed if you sought out this film, you probably already know a lot about Ethiopia, which I found was alienating.
Great. Next, we have another black and white film.
Yes, there've been a lot of black and white in the Sundance so far. Passing, which was really interesting. So I didn't know that I'd never heard of the book before, but it was a book published in the end of the 1920s. What Passing is referring to is people who are black but of fair enough skin tone that they can pass as white. So it's about these two girls who knew each other in high school in the South and both got out. Tessa Thompson, who's Valkyrie in the Marvel Cinematic Universe series, she is the main character, Irene, and then her friend Ruth Nega, who played by Ruth Nega. She happens upon her one day while escaping the heat in the city, and ends up seeing this friend from across the room who she doesn't even recognize because her friend from high school has now got blonde hair, and finds out she's living in Chicago, meets her husband, who's played by Alexander Skarsgård, who freely tosses the N-word around and is super duper racist. And Tessa Thompson still lives as a black woman. She has a black husband. She lives in Harlem. She has 2 black boys. They identify as black, despite the ability that occasionally she passes for white and goes into Manhattan. Whereas her friend has completely shed her black identity and lives as a white woman. And her husband, if he found out, would surely divorce her or worse. So that's kind of the setup. Then it flashes forward a little bit in time, and this friend kind of won't leave Irene alone, keeps writing her letters, and then eventually just shows up and kind of inserts herself into her life and starts to take it over. Saying things like, I miss the community, I miss our culture. And almost to the point where Irene starts to question, are you trying to take my husband? Are you trying to take my kids? Like what aspect of my life is off limits to you? So it becomes a little bit dark, which so does Great Gatsby. And it has some parallels, and the 2 books were published within like 3 years of each other. But it was really interesting. I really liked it. A lot of layers to it. It filmed in black and white, but also one thing that's really cool, if you've seen a lot of these older films on like TCM, the early talkies from the ends of the 20s or the 30s, is they don't use, for the most part, camera shots that wouldn't have been achieved at the time. So back then, cameras were so heavy, they kind of had to be stationary. You didn't see big panning shots. And that's very much the way the film is composed, which is really cool. Also, they don't put in film grain, but it also doesn't look like a digitally shot black and white film of today's standards. Usually when you just flip the color from color to black and white, it all looks so sharp and jarring. in today's world. And this had those kind of softer edges, softer focus, like a film made in the 20s. So what I really liked about Passing is if it came on TCM just in the middle of the day, you might have a hard time placing when it was made, except for obviously back then they wouldn't have made a film with a Black main character protagonist, or even a film that talked about racism. It was just kind of not of the era.
Starring 2 Marvel veterans.
Yeah.
So what do you end up giving that one?
I want to say I gave it 5 out of 5. I can't remember anything I didn't like about it.
So next one's the one I've seen too. It is CODA, which is the acronym for Children of Deaf Adults. And
it's also the record holder for the highest paid for film out of Sundance Film Festival in history. It beat Palm Springs' record from last year. So Apple TV won the bidding war for $29 million. And thus far, I would say this is the best scripted film of the festival. The main character, Ruby, is the only hearing member of her all-deaf family. And she is kind of core to their livelihood. In addition to that, the father and the brother are fishermen, and she goes out on the boat with them, and she's basically their ears at sea. If someone comes on the radio or another ship blares their horn, she's the one who hears it for them. And because they can't hear, she plays her music loud and sings at the top of her lungs. And it's just something she kind of does in her free time. But then her teacher at school, she's forced to take an elective. She ends up in choir. Her teacher notices that she has a really special voice and starts to encourage her to maybe think about pursuing a scholarship for studying music as a higher education, something that she had never really thought about before. So it kind of gives her this license to dream. She starts to get confused by that. On top of that, it's kind of a coming of age story. So there's a boy at school that sort of becomes a little bit of a love interest, but the main thrust of the film is really this family dynamic. All 3 of the actors here to the right side of the screen, not the girl on the far left, are her family, her parents, and her brother. And the actors who play them are all actually hearing impaired themselves, which made for some really phenomenal scenes. It was weirdly very funny. Marlee Matlin is who you're circling with your cursor.
From Candlelight Processional fame.
Of Candlelight Processional fame. But the dad in particular, I mean, it's a very funny film in addition to being heartfelt. The dad delivers this insanely funny moment that I won't ruin for anybody. And then also one of the most heartfelt moments at the end. He's the part that made me start to actually weep. Also, the mother and daughter have this really unique relationship. Obviously, they subtitle any of the all sign language scenes for anyone who doesn't know American Sign Language, which I sure don't. And then that also opens up to an international audience because American Sign Language is American Sign Language.
Yeah, when I first heard about the film, they had a different publicity image, which was the girl like looking forlorn on a boat
with like a cloudy sky. It looked so depressing. Yeah, it was not even on my list going into it.
And so when I started watching it, I was like, okay, like I'll have my computer ready and I'll.
And I just started watching it because it was blowing up. Like,
yeah, no, and
when I started watching it, Apple TV hadn't yet bought it, but I was thinking like, okay, if everybody's talking about this movie, I should probably see it, and maybe Hulu or Searchlight are going to go after it.
Yeah, no, this thing sold for a gazillion dollars, like $25 million, which is
29.
But it's uplifting. It doesn't have, there's hard moments in it, but it is not a depressing film. It's an emotional film, but not depressing. It's not, everyone's not miserable at the end.
No.
Yeah, I don't want to spoil the ending, but it's not like, one of those movies everyone starts here and then they just kind of descend into darkness.
No, definitely an uplifting story with some dramatic moments, but also very much a comedy. And, this one, I would be shocked if it doesn't end up a Best Picture nominee. This is definitely one to see that I highly recommend. I think it's kind of a shame that Apple TV is who won it, because I feel like that's not a streaming platform with that big of an audience. I'm thinking maybe an Oscar nom will get more people to go there and pay to experience their service. But I feel like between Netflix, Disney Plus, Hulu, and HBO Max and Peacock, like Apple TV probably has the largest share of subscribers.
Yeah, I mean, I don't even know what Apple TV Plus is anymore. All these different, it's not as simple as pay $5 and you get it, right? It's but yeah, I mean, this deserves a theatrical release. Not saying it won't get it. Apple might find a way to make it have one before it goes to the service, but it's a great film. It doesn't necessarily even feel independent or Sundancey. It's it could just I mean, no one would discover this movie without the kind of buzz of a Sundance, but it's definitely a wide tent. I mean, there's some language and some adult situations, but it's not gratuitous. It's it's not a family friendly film, but it's definitely not a dirge of a film. So
no, it's probably a PG-13 rating. Like, I don't think there's anything that should make it go higher than that. I don't feel like there's even an F-bomb.
Or
maybe there's one, which
there's non-spoken ones.
Oh yeah, does that count?
I don't know anymore.
I feel like I see people flipping people off or showing the bird in PG-13 movies all the time. I don't think it counts.
Any case, speaking of dirges of a film, I saw this one too. I mean, it's safe to say you gave this 5 out of 5, right?
Oh yeah, CODA 5 out of 5. You saw this next one, but like you were working, you weren't really watching.
Well, I was mainly working to distract me from it. Like, I watched the first few minutes and I was like, this is not my kind of movie.
Yeah, this movie does not start well. I was bummed because Cryptozoo was actually one of my highest anticipated films between this and Street Gang. Main reason being it's the only animated feature, like all animated other than Flea the documentary. This is a fictional animated film, and it was completely independently made in the US. So I was really interested in seeing this. Also, the concept sounded kind of fun to me. It's about a zoo that houses mythological creatures. So things like unicorns, Pegasus, Loch Ness Monster, Yetis. That's the premise of Cryptozoo. And the execution is just really creepy. Has a lot of violence. It's very gory. It has a lot of sex, and unnecessarily so. And then there's a character who's basically just naked the whole entire film. Everything on display. Has some really unique artistic styles. It's the filmmaker described it as kind of a collage of animation styles, and sometimes I thought it was very beautiful. This is a shot that I really enjoyed, but the actual characters themselves, they were drawn on paper and scanned in, and you can see like the pulp of the paper. They're then like painted and whatever, but it seemed like they used flash animation. So an example of like a really bad animated shot was a character was swimming, and instead of having their arms going like this, they like drew them like this and then had their arms just this part move. Like it looked like something out of South Park at sometimes, which was really unsettling. And overall, I mean, storyline wise, it was very derivative of Jurassic Park. With some Miyazaki elements thrown in, definitely some Princess Mononoke. They did make a couple of Disney references, and probably my favorite moment in the film is they end up in Orlando, and the establishing shot of Orlando included Spaceship Earth and the skyline, and it was all Herb Ryman Epcot concept art colors, so it was all like yellow and orange and kind of hazy. And I have to imagine there's some Disney fans who worked on this film who were inspired by that, because there's just no way you coincidentally put Spaceship Earth in hues of yellow and orange and not be taken by that Herb Ryman concept art. But overall, it was just so poorly executed that I was so disappointed in it. I think I gave it 2 out of 5.
Yeah. So this is, as I said, there could be a case made for the violence in the film to kind of make a point.
The violence is fine, but like the gore was excessive.
The gratuitous sex was unnecessary.
And you get your first sex scene like 30 seconds in.
Right, and it has nothing to do with the plot.
No. And
then speaking of sort of cringeworthy, when one of the characters starts talking about dreaming about storming the Capitol.
Yeah. That was obviously they didn't know.
No, they didn't. But you're just like, I'm out. And I love, there's some people that like it. They like this. I read a lot of reviews, and there's some people that just hated this movie. And it's a very polarizing film. I I feel like, even despite the fact I wasn't actively watching, that it got better as it went on. But the beginning part was a little off-putting.
But yeah, I mean, overall, all of those scenes that just make you want to, unsee things, are what stayed with me by the end. So by the end, I was like, okay, I like this, this, and this, but I hated this, 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 and this with a passion. So you kind of end up at a point where it's like, I don't want to see this again. And if I don't want to see it again, it's less than 3 stars,
Yeah, no, go watch. I feel like you have to watch Street Gang after that to like.
Yeah, you need comfort food immediately when you're done with Cryptozoo.
Next, we got On the Count of Three, which I did not see.
I watched this morning, and somebody commented on my tweet of just the brief synopsis and said that sounds terrible, and it does. When I was reading the premise, I was like, "Oh, this doesn't sound fun." It is a comedy, despite what you see. And these two friends make a pact. They're both so the guy on the left, he has had a host of mental health issues since he was a child. At the beginning of this film, he's in a psychological wellness facility. His other friend is miserable in his life, and they don't really tell you the reasons right up front, but he has a oddly funny failed suicide attempt at the start of the film, where he's trying to hang himself with his own belt in a bathroom stall. Meanwhile, one of his colleagues is urinating and singing a Trace Adkins songs about how much he loves his life. And so just that like duality lends itself to a bit of a funny moment. Anyway, he springs his friend out of the wellness facility, and they make this pact that they will assist each other with their suicides, that they will, on the count of 3, pull the trigger. But the one friend says, well, now that I know I'm going today, can we have this day? Can we like do some things we need to do, clear things up? So like the main character, his ex-girlfriend is Tiffany Haddish. They just recently broke up and he was planning to propose. So like she's on his list of things to do is to go and talk to her. Not things to do like that, but go talk to her. Confronting his dad is on that list. The other guy wants to confront his childhood therapist who really messed him up, who's played by Henry Winkler. And, it's a dark comedy look at life and mental health in a way that shouldn't be funny, but the way they do it, it's funny. It made me feel lighter. I mean, obviously these have been dark and depressing times, and you go from a movie like Cryptozoo and you need something that's going to cheer you up. And weirdly enough, On the Count of 3 was a cheerful film. It's from the writers of Hulu's Rami as well, which is a series that I've really enjoyed. So if you like Rami on Hulu, On the Count of 3 has some similar humor, and Rami certainly finds comedy in dark moments. It's also the directorial debut of Jared Carmichael, who had his own NBC sitcom. He's been in Rami before as well. So I thought it was an excellent directorial debut, really showcased a lot of skill, a lot of depth, a lot of undertones, has a Midwestern setting, which I relate to because I grew up there, and just how drab and seasonal affect disorder these winter months can be there. So it takes place, I think it's supposed to be Illinois because there's a couple people with like Chicago Bucks or Chicago Bulls jerseys and stuff in the background. But it was very true to that. I know a lot of people in the Midwest where I grew up who have that seasonal affect disorder and get very depressed and somewhat suicidal in the winter months. And then when the springtime comes, they feel a lot better.
What do you end up giving it?
I think I gave this one 5 out of 5. This is another one where I kind of just loved everything about it. This was super cool. You got to see some of this today. This is a documentary called Misha and the Wolves. And it's a real story. I didn't know the real story going into it, but in the 90s, a book was published by this woman who was living in I can't remember what state right now. Her name's Misha. She grew up in Belgium, and she expressed to her synagogue one day that as a child in Belgium, her parents were taken, and she was put in this horrible foster care situation. And all she knew was her parents were in Germany. So one day she just got up and left at age 7 and walked through the woods to Germany to try and find them. And along the way was befriended by a pack of wolves. And those wolves ended up kind of treating her as one of their own and assisting her on her way to Germany. So she tells the story in the synagogue. It all blows up from there. Eventually, this small publisher hears about it and contacts her and wants her to write this as a book, and she'll publish it. So that happens towards like 97. At that time, I never knew about this, but I guess Disney was very interested in adapting her story as a film. So Disney was putting up front some money. Oprah's book club wanted this. They wanted the author to come on their show. And she started getting reluctant. And then she kind of turned on the publisher, sued her for a lot of money, won the case, and then it goes with a different publisher and publishes it internationally. So you've got this other publisher who's scorned, whose life has kind of been ruined because Misha is, in her story, a Holocaust survivor. She's kind of pointed at publicly as, how dare you cause so much hurt and pain for this person who's been through such a great ordeal. So some time goes by. And then she hears that, this book is with another publisher. It's been translated by her into French, and then they've translated that into a bunch of other languages. And she's going on all these book tours in Europe and things. And something about it doesn't seem right to her, the way that she flipped and is doing everything with this other publisher that she wouldn't do with her. And gets a genealogist to start looking into things, who quickly identifies a lot of holes in the story. And as it goes, like, the documentary just keeps introducing you to different people. So this screenshot right here is the genealogist in the US who has pinned all the points of her story, where she went on maps, all the photos that are in the books or have been made available online of her. And one of the things that she notices is a name discrepancy between her foster parents in the English print version versus the French print version. So all kind of snowballs, and you start to find out that this whole entire story was fabricated. It gets just deeper and weirder, but the way the film is made is also really cool too. They don't tell you up front that they couldn't get the real Misha to participate, because why would you want to talk about this time that you defrauded the world with a completely fabricated story? But they have an actress in her place, doing a really good job. And so as the film goes, and the whole story starts to come apart, that actress starts to take off the wig, and they start to dismantle the sets and do all these really cool things that just added a whole nother layer to the filmmaking piece of it. So I absolutely loved this film. Really hope it gets picked up because of the historical aspects of it. I would think even National Geographic could be a good home for it. So I'm really curious to see what happens with Misha and the Wolves, but this one kind of blew my mind and was really fun to watch.
Yeah, this one I caught the tail end of, and it was really engaging. I look forward to whenever it gets distributed, to catching it on the flip side. But yeah, this was another gem.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and then you got one more that you watched today.
Yep. Rebel Hearts. And this one I didn't know going into it, but in the filmmaker's intro, he started, thanking the producers, and among them was Abigail Disney, is an executive producer on this film. But this tells the story of the Sisters of the Immaculate Heart, which was a college and a high school for women in Hollywood. It starts with why women in the mid-century were particularly drawn to going into the church and becoming a nun as an alternative to becoming a housewife or a mother, because those were really, there were very few options in terms of a career beyond those two. So it was a very attractive field for women, but once they got in, it almost treats it kind of cult-like, that you're forced into this marriage ceremony to Jesus wearing a wedding dress, and then your habit gets blessed and you put it on, and all these ritualistic things. And anyway, this new cardinal gets sent from the Roman Catholic Church to LA, and he starts this Catholic school program. And suddenly, these nuns found themselves being teachers, even though they themselves, in many cases, hadn't achieved a high school degree. And so they found themselves, grossly unprepared for the job, given a class of like 80 kids. And that's where a lot of the stories, they said, come from, of the mean nun teacher who just couldn't handle it and was at her wit's end. But this order of nuns decided this isn't right, and they got the cardinal to pay for them to be educated on the weekends, so they would spend their Saturdays in schools and slowly get an educator's degree. But eventually they started this school that became very progressive, Immaculate Heart. And from there, they really started getting involved and engaged with the students and the political issues that were important to them. They ended up really causing a huge tear within the Catholic Church system. Around this time, the Vatican started to try and get a little more progressive. So they set up the Vatican II, which was trying to kind of be a little more lax, a little more progressive with some of their rules. And these sisters kind of took it to the max. One of them became kind of a pop artist, started doing kind of modern interpretations of the Holy Family, which the church sent her a letter saying, you have to stop that. So she then started doing it with words, at first very inspirational, but then her artwork became a lot more political. There's a whole center established to that former sister as an artist, but ultimately these nuns were forced to renounce their sisterhood and leave the church, as it were, and kind of stayed in LA and still formed this community. So all of this vintage footage and interviews are juxtaposed against modern footage of the nuns who are still alive at the 2018 March for Women in LA. And one of those nuns was at the Selma March with Martin Luther King Jr. During the time when they were, getting this all started in the 60s. So it was really inspiring, these women of God, being so progressive, really doing the right thing, the thing that you expect the church to do. But in these cases, church leadership, which was a patriarchy, was not for it. So it was really interesting. Obviously there have been a lot of eye-opening documentaries and stories about time in the church, but this was really good, really inspiring, and used animation as well as a storytelling device, and they did it in the style of that pop art nun, which was really cool. So I enjoyed this one quite a bit. Didn't love it. It did have, I loved it, but it had some slow moments, which is where I critiqued it a little bit. Some kind of scenes where it just seemed like everything stopped. They just almost wanted to give you like a Wikipedia entry on something that felt a little too slow or wasn't entertaining enough. So I think I landed on 4 out of 5 for Rebel Hearts, but this was a really good one as well.
Great. I did not see it, so I have nothing to say. But so we're I guess we're sort of over the hill with
yeah, Sundance started Thursday. It officially ends Wednesday, but Tuesday night they do their awards ceremony. So Tuesday is actually like the last day of premieres, and then Wednesday is kind of like a day to catch up if you wanted. But it was yeah, so really I'm only participating in the next 2 days. I've got 2 days left, but that doesn't mean I'm done for the day, because I always try and watch a movie at night as well. So I average about 4 movies a day. And Neon / Hulu just picked up another documentary called Ailey. So that's my next movie to screen, which I'll be doing tonight. So you can look for that review sometime tomorrow on Laughing Place. And I'll be doing this for 2 more days. 4 movies a day, trying to get a review up real fast between each one.
So now we're at the part we're going to talk about what's going on with Laughing Place next week. And I really just want to focus on tomorrow because we got a full day planned. At 9 a.m., Jeremiah will be live at Epcot to check out the latest of goings on over there, including the new Soul exhibit at the American Adventure. Then at 11, Mike's going to be at Downtown Disney to see how they're adjusting to life with outdoor dining. At 1:30 is Marvel Monday for the 4th episode of WandaVision, which if you haven't seen, check that out. Right? And then at 3 o'clock, Jeremiah will be at Disney Springs to catch what some of the stuff they're doing for Black History Month, which obviously starts tomorrow. Then at 4 o'clock, we got Disney Parks Talk Live. And at 7:30, the Laughing Place Movie Club with Mary Poppins returns. So a full day tomorrow. But now we're at the part of the show where we're going to share what our top pick was from last week and what we're looking forward to most this week from the Walt Disney Company. So my pick for last week was WandaVision Episode 4. For those of you that felt it was starting a little slow and didn't know what's going on, you still don't know what's going on, but now you kind of see it embedded in the Marvel Cinematic Universe and some great references to other things in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. You really get to see, if you're familiar with the comics, a real House of M moment. So that was my pick. Alex?
I would say my pick from last week would probably be the return of Big Sky. But I did realize there is one more thing from Sundance that we didn't talk about, which was the Disney thing.
That's right. We'll talk about that right at the end.
Okay.
Because I went down the list and then missed out.
You didn't go back to the start.
And then what about next week?
Gosh. For this week, probably looking forward most to the next episode of WandaVision. I loved this last episode, but I am hoping to see the 80s, which was the era that I was like most excited to see because it's kind of my like most nostalgic time frame that I've lived through. So I'm waiting for that 80s charged episode of WandaVision where they're doing their at-home workout in their leg warmers.
So next, we'll talk about. Oh, I didn't share mine. I'm most looking forward to. I don't know if we're going to get anything, but Super Bowl's coming up. Usually, we get a couple of Disney trailers. I know the world's weird right now, but I'm looking forward to watching the Super Bowl from the Disney perspective.
Who's doing the halftime show?
Is it The Weeknd?
Oh, okay. I was gonna say I hadn't heard. Whereas like last year, I feel like a month before, everyone was
The Weeknd minus the 30. So here we go, Alex. What do you know about Baymax?
Baymax Dreams, Fred's Glitch, was a last-minute announcement for Sundance Film Festival. It premiered in their New Horizons category, which has always been their kind of experimental media section of the festival. So usually things like in VR or things that are a little more interactive. So what they've done this year is it's like this virtual hub. You can create an avatar and walk around and talk to people. And you then get a link if you want to experience Baymax Dreams, which is a YouTube series by the creators of Big Hero 6, the series. So it's the Disney Television Animation is their official title. No Walt in there. And so this was an interactive short. You had to experience on a completely different platform. The process of signing up for that was a little bit frustrating. And then once you're in, really the concept is you're hero and you are uploading Fred into this digital environment where he is supposed to be able to take control of Baymax and do things around virtual San Francisco. But a glitch happens during the upload and Fred then introduces glitches into this environment, one of which becomes a little pet who he named Gertrude. And then you are trying, what was it, Ben?
I laughed.
Oh, okay. And I was going to say, you didn't see me doing this. You were at a different room. So you haven't seen it or done it. So really the interaction piece is you have to like hold and touch your screen. It can only be played on a smartphone. It can actually only be played on an iPhone beyond that. So it's a little limited in who can actually experience it based on the type of phone you have. And, but you're touching your screen to kind of help suck up bits of this glitch. I found the actual short itself to be quite glitchy. So one of the kind of new technologies of this is rather than having to download anything like an app, it all gets beamed through the cloud. But I found that even living in Silicon Valley with the highest speed internet known to man, it couldn't keep up with the demand of this experience. So my actual experience glitched quite a lot, which was what was funny because the whole press release was about how like it's all coming from the cloud. So if you've got good internet, you're golden. Also, it can only handle so many people experiencing it at a time. So I had a 20-minute wait in a virtual queue about 100 people deep, and you had to keep your phone alive during that whole time. So if your screen went dark, it reset where you were in that queue. So for 20 minutes, you just had to have it keep on the page and keep sliding up to make sure it didn't go dark so you could experience Baymax Dreams. It was not more entertaining than any kind of touch the screen smartphone app like Super Mario Run or anything like that. So I kind of don't understand the reason for the technology, except for using it on younger kid-focused content for kids who no longer have the attention span to just sit and watch a 3-minute short. Because other than that, it served no real purpose. And it was kind of like the equivalent of in a preschool Disney Junior show having Doc McStuffins ask you, do you see the tool I need? Point. Tell me which one it is. Great. It was kind of like that. Like if you didn't do it, it happened anyway, somehow.
Yeah. And to be fair, this was billed as sort of an experimental work in progress kind of thing. It's not, it's not out there for, guests to really use. And, it's more of just it's coming from the studio lab, which is their sort of experimental division. So it's there was no cost or anything like that. So, but it's interesting to see where they're investing, and hopefully they can kind of smooth out the wrinkles before they really make it something that they offer as a product.
Yeah. And I'm curious to see, what the end goal vision is for this. Obviously this app that they use to do it, which is mostly a gaming app, was called GeForce Now. And that user experience itself, in my opinion, was pretty cumbersome. So I would hope that they develop their own platform to host this type of content.
Great. So just some scheduling stuff. Next week's the Super Bowl, so we won't be doing a traditional LP in depth. If there's enough Disney content, we might get a group together to kind of talk about the new trailers that have been released, but we don't know if there's going to be any, just with the way release dates are these days. However, and then the following week is President's Day weekend, so we're going to be off, but then we'll be back after that to go in depth onto some exciting part of the Walt Disney Company. So we'll see you back here in 1, 2, 3 weeks. And keep on checking out Laughing Place for Alex's coverage of the Sundance Film Festival. And if Disney gets involved in any of these films or any other films, we will let you know. And you can read our reviews. Thanks, Alex.
Thank you.
Bye, everybody.